Hey everybody, I have absolutely struggled with this particular game ever since I first got it, quite a while ago now actually. This is Humankind. It is a 4X turn-based strategy game developed by Amplitude Studios and originally published by Sega, although ever since Amplitude separated from Sega, now they publish it themselves. And it originally released back in 2021 and had a fair amount of hype building up to its release, because the Civilization series in particular has just never really had much in the way of competition. If you wanted a historically based 4X strategy game where you took a civilization from the Stone Age on up through the modern day and beyond, you had the Civilization series, and that was kinda it. Then along comes Humankind, and they decide to shake up the paradigm a bit by introducing a system for swapping out civilizations when you reach new eras. So you start out the game as a basic hunter-gatherer society, so you're just wandering around the map exploring, you're finding curiosities and getting food curiosities to train your additional hunting parties. And eventually, once you've collected enough curiosities and generated enough era score, then you are given the opportunity to select your actual civilization, or at least your starting civilization. And each of them, of course, have their own unique units, they have their own unique buildings, and they have their own specific bonuses and detriments. And then as you continue playing, eventually you will gain enough era score to move on to the next era, at which point you can either transcend your current civilization and give them a couple of extra bonuses on top of the ones they already have, or you can replace it with a successor civilization. And by successor, I don't mean it evolves into something that would be logical for it. I mean, you could start playing as something like the Babylonians, and then when the next era rolls around, you change over to the Celts, because you can just do that. It doesn't matter what the next civilization is, just that the new unique unit you have is appropriate for that era in terms of its stats, and whatever bonuses and detriments and unique units and unique buildings that new civilization has, replace whatever your previous civilizations were. Now, there are a lot of ideas going on with this. The first of them is the idea of having a sort of successor civilization. Something from the ancient era doesn't necessarily survive into the following era or on up to modern day or anything like that, but you can do that if you want by transcending that culture. Or you can say that whatever civilization you pick succeeded the previous one and then just continue on. So there's a sort of lineage there, but in a very weird roundabout way that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The other idea is purely mechanical. The idea that you go into the game with a certain mindset, and then as the course of the game progresses, things will change, and so your initial strategy may not necessarily work out going forward, so it might be better to pick a culture that goes in an entirely different strategic direction, or something that just better synergizes with whatever you've previously set up, but can continue into your current situation. In other words, while in most 4X strategy games, Civilization included, you would pick your faction and that would dictate how you would play the rest of the game, in Humankind, you start off the game with no real defined playstyle, and then you pick your initial culture, and that will determine your initial setup of play, and then as the game progresses, you can alter things as you see fit. And from a purely mechanical perspective, it mostly works fine. It's just that it's a very gamey way of handling things. Instead of having the very strong thematic core that, say, the Civilization series has, or well, I should say had, up until Civ 7 anyway, where you take a civilization and you go from the Stone Age up to the modern day and beyond. You build an empire that will stand the test of time. That is the core of the Civilization series up until Civ 7. And that does absolutely define the entire playstyle of the game. It's one of the big reasons why the Civilization series has endured for so long. If your game or your series has a very strongly defined core identity, then that's something players can latch onto and use as their guiding star for figuring out what the entire game's about. And ironically enough, the central mechanic of Humankind, this civilization switching mechanic, means that it doesn't really have a strongly defined core identity. Yeah, it's a 4X historically based strategy game, but what's it really about? I mean, the title of the game gives the impression that it's about the human experience. And yet when you get into the game proper, there's not really anything to latch onto for that idea. I mean, think about it this way. If you play Civilization 6, the most recent Civilization game prior to the release of Humankind, when you pick a faction in that game, you are not simply picking whatever unique units and buildings you have, as well as whatever mechanical bonuses and detriments you have. You're also picking what your faction color is. You're picking what your faction leader is. So, for example, if you pick the Egyptians, you get Hatshepsut, whereas if you're playing as the Polish, you get Jadwiga. You're also picking what your faction's units look like, because there are actually visual differences between the various factions. And you're even picking what music is going to be in the background while you're playing the game. So even though the core gameplay mechanics are going to be the same regardless of which civilization you're playing, your civilization has a rather dramatic impact on what the actual experience of any given match is. Meanwhile, hopping into any given match of Humankind feels almost exactly the same. You're having the same leader regardless. You customize your leader's appearance and voice, and then their clothing changes as you progress through the eras and pick different cultures, but that's about the only thing that's actually going to change. They're going to have the same voice regardless. They're going to say the same lines regardless.
Greetings. I'm called hot-blooded, short-tempered, passionate. All the highest compliments. Greetings. I'm called hot-blooded, short-tempered, passionate. All the highest compliments. Greetings. I'm called hot-blooded, short-tempered, passionate.
It's not like they're going to speak a different language or anything like that. I mean, when you hop into a game of Civ 6, for example, not only are all the different leaders going to have different lines depending on their own individual personalities, but they're also going to be speaking different languages. I mean, sure, you'll have, say, Teddy Roosevelt of the Americans or Victoria of the English speaking English, because of course that's what makes sense for them, but you'll have the likes of, say, Gandhi speaking not only English, but also Hindi. And then when you get to characters who logically wouldn't be speaking English, they're speaking languages that make sense for them. So, for example, Emperor Trajan speaks reconstructed classical Latin, whereas Christina of the Swedes speaks Swedish. And even in situations where they couldn't necessarily get something truly accurate for that particular character, like, say, Gilgamesh of the Sumerians or Hammurabi of the Babylonians, they're at least speaking something that is reasonably close to what it might have sounded like, so they're speaking versions of Akkadian, although we still don't really know exactly what Akkadian would have sounded like either, so they do their best effort there. The point is, each individual leader has a very specific personality and the way they speak and the way they carry themselves, and it gives them a lot of flavor and helps those factions have a lot of flavor. Whereas in Humankind, because every leader pulls from the same tiny pool of lines and they all speak English, every single culture feels almost exactly the same. The only differences are purely mechanical. And while that's fine from a purely mechanical perspective, it also only means that the game has basically no personality to speak of. You're playing it basically for the mechanics and nothing else. And unfortunately, that's just not enough to carry the experience, because the mechanics in this, while mostly fine, have a few pretty significant downsides. The first of these is simultaneous turns. And this is a problem that plagues Endless Legend as well. That's another game Amplitude Studios made that was remarkably similar to Humankind, but they made it before Humankind. And I'll talk about that one more in its own video, because there's different things to say about that. But regardless, simultaneous turns make the actual point of turn-based gameplay fairly moot, because now, instead of every single player taking their turn, everyone's taking their turn all at the same time. So you might move a unit, and because the other players moved a unit in the direction that your unit was going, it's going to interrupt what they're doing, and it just ends up getting messy at best. Now, to be fair, this is a problem that plagues any turn-based strategy game that has simultaneous turns. It's not just Humankind, but it is particularly annoying in Humankind, because it does mean that you're going to end up fighting a whole bunch of battles that you didn't really want to get yourself into, and the combat system in this game is garbage. Just downright garbage. You see, whenever you get into a fight in this game, you have two options. The first is auto-resolve, and that's the one I use most of the time because the combat is so tedious. If you actually decide to fight a battle, then it zooms into an actual battlescape within the same tile structure of the map, so it's a bit janky with the way it actually works. But at that point, each side is commanding the individual units that are in whatever stack they've got, and they're trying to maneuver them to either capture a flag or to simply defeat all of the enemy units. Now, in theory, because it is a specific, dedicated, tactical combat mechanic, it's theoretically going to have more depth than the likes of Civilization's combat system, but in reality, it's got about the same level of depth, but is considerably more tedious, because when you're messing around with combat in, say, the Civilization games, it's all in the same action economy that you're using for all of your units. Whether they're builders or trade caravans or whatever, you're commanding all of that as part of the same phase, and it's very simple, very straightforward. There's no simultaneous turn structure to worry about, and combat doesn't really interrupt what you're actually doing, it's just part of everything else. Whereas in Humankind, combat is a direct interruption of all of the empire building itself. If you choose to fight a battle manually, you have to go through the entire thing before you're allowed to go back to the empire building. And the further you get into the game, the more likely you're going to be running into larger armies, which means that you're going to have a lot more units you need to contend with and a lot more units you need to control, which in turn makes the combat considerably more drawn out and tedious. Hence me saying that auto-resolve is really the preferred way of handling combat, because at least it skips all of that. Of course, the downside there is that there are some battles where you can actually win them if you decide to fight them manually, but if you decide to auto-calc them instead, then the game will just say you lose them. So sometimes you do have to fight the battles, and it sucks every single time. Now, I should note as well that this is not a problem exclusive to Humankind in Amplitude's lineup. Endless Legend also suffers from this problem, although not quite as badly, because in Endless Legend, there's also things like hero units and unit upgrades to consider that actually do flesh out that combat considerably more than what's on display in Humankind. So even though that system is also tedious, it's more in-depth and is just more interesting in general, so it doesn't affect you quite as negatively. But as rough as the combat gets, it doesn't even hold a candle to how utterly stupid the war system in this game is. You see, wars are fought using a war support score system. The idea here is that each faction will gradually generate grievances against one another. It'll be things like territorial disputes, or diplomatic disputes like refusing to adopt the same civics as another civilization, or religious disputes where another faction is not adopting your religion, or they are supposedly oppressing your religion's followers in their own territories. And of course, there's always the classic, if you don't have a non-aggression pact, then the other faction attacks one of your units, and you get to say, hey, you attacked me, I demand reparations. Well, eventually, the other factions will undoubtedly refuse whatever demands you are proposing to them, and you will be given the option to either forget the grievance or to declare war on them. And once you've declared war, then you need to fight battles against them and ransack their territories, take control of their cities, defeat their armies, and as you do this, your war score will continue to remain high, whereas theirs will continue to deplete. Thing is, you can be in a prolonged state of war against another faction, and nothing really happens during that because the AI may not necessarily send troops to attack you, or you may need to regroup some of your forces to deploy them to a different part of their empire, or whatever the case may be. You might have prolonged sequences where nothing's really happening on the war front, nobody's really succeeding or failing, and in some cases, you can just have factions declare war on each other and just not ever do anything about it. The war is technically ongoing, and you can technically fight each other, but neither you nor the enemy faction is really doing anything about it. And regardless of which situation you're in, your war support score will go down the longer the war goes on, and especially if the faction you're going up against adopts a pacifist mindset. Now, this all wouldn't necessarily be that much of a problem if you could just fight battles and take the enemy's territory, defeat their units, and just subjugate them as a faction. Except you can do that and still lose. I'll repeat that because it is one of the stupidest things I have ever had to utter about the warfare system in any video game I've ever played, and you probably just thought to yourself, no way, DW, you couldn't possibly have just said that. You mean to say that you can fight an enemy and beat the crap out of them and still lose the war? Yep, because if enough things go into reducing your war support score, it doesn't matter how well you're doing, you can still lose. It is legitimately one of the most frustrating and asinine mechanics I have ever seen for managing warfare in a strategy game. I mean, think about it this way. You can have situations where you do basically nothing wrong strategically, where the enemies say attacking a scout unit in the middle of nowhere, and so you click retreat because it's a scout unit. I mean, it's not a military unit, it doesn't have much strength, it's not going to be able to stand up in the fight. So retreating is the better option for that unit. In terms of actual warfare logic, that makes perfect sense. In Humankind warfare logic, it is one of the dumbest moves you can possibly make. It is better to just let that unit die because every single time you retreat, it counts as a loss for you and a victory for them, which means that every single time you do that, you lose war support score and they gain war support score. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh, it's fine, it's just a scout unit in the middle of nowhere, they'll chase that around, it'll keep them busy while I build up my forces, but then you build up your forces and you're like, alright, it's time to attack, and suddenly the game's like, no, you've lost the war. The hell do you mean I lost the war? They haven't invaded my territory and taken any of it over. I haven't lost any units. There hasn't even been any actual combat taking place. How the hell could I possibly have lost the war? Well, because your war support score bottomed out. Okay, why did it bottom out? Because you had this scout in the middle of nowhere that kept retreating from every battle, which means that you've been losing every single battle of this war, which means that you lose all of your war support, which means that you lose. That was not hyperbole. That was not a joke. That is something that has happened to me in this game, and it was basically how I had my crash course in learning how the warfare system works. And once I had that crash course, I learned to hate warfare in Humankind. The actual way you win wars is diplomacy. You have to send your diplomatic units, envoys, around to collect leverage that you can use against the other faction and apply that to reduce their war support score. And so you can actually win wars even if you're actually losing every single battle simply by managing grievances and using your diplomatic leverage against them. It basically takes what is already kind of annoying in this game, which is just the combat mechanics themselves, and makes them even more annoying by adding this extra layer of awkward, shoehorned in micromanagement that just makes it really not fun to engage in warfare at all. Because after all, once your war support hits 0, you don't have a choice. The game forces you to surrender and accept whatever demands the other faction lays upon you. And as if that isn't frustrating enough, the ultimate frustration with this is when you do actually win militarily and you have conquered all of their territory, you occupy all of their cities, or you outright destroy all of their cities and all of their outposts, and so they have no territory left at all, you still don't actually win the war until their war support score completely bottoms out to nothing. And it might still take a few turns to hit that point. It is just tiresome and frustrating, and the better move is to simply not engage in warfare at all if you possibly can. Not that the game will let you, because eventually, for some reason or another, you will end up in warfare with another faction, whether you want to or not. And it was ultimately this warfare system that completely soured my interest in this game. I just don't want to play it anymore. I really tried to delve into Humankind and really get a feel for it, and ultimately was hoping to be able to do a full review of the game, but I just can't bring myself to finish a match. Every single time I have hopped into a match of Humankind, I have either just gotten too frustrated with certain mechanics, particularly the warfare system, or if I didn't get frustrated enough with the mechanics to stop playing that particular match, then the tedium would start setting in, and eventually I would just get so bored with this game from the tedium of the mechanics themselves, and especially the complete lack of personality that it has, that I found myself just wanting to do pretty much anything else, and so I would just stop playing that particular match. Maybe I'd save it, maybe I wouldn't, and most likely I would never come back to that save file again. I would just try a different strategy and see if maybe that would be more interesting this time around, only it never really worked out that way. Now, obviously, your mileage is going to vary on all this kind of thing. You might find the convoluted, messy warfare system to be incredibly engaging. I don't know why you would, but maybe you do. Or you might find the mechanics themselves make up for the complete lack of personality, or maybe you like the complete lack of personality. Again, I don't know why you would, but maybe for whatever reason you do. Or maybe that civilization switching mechanic is exactly the thing you've been looking for. Or maybe you just solely play this thing in multiplayer. I haven't actually played multiplayer in this thing myself yet, and I probably never will because the very few people I know who have played this game don't actively play it, don't keep it installed, and certainly aren't really interested in playing multiplayer matches with me. And to put it simply, I don't like playing strategy games with random people that I don't know online, so multiplayer is just something I never really delved into in this game. Maybe that's this game's biggest strength, I don't know, but I know that the Humankind player base is pretty small at this point, so getting into an online match might be a bit tricky. But who knows, maybe you'll get lucky and never have any problems getting into matches online. Maybe you'll have people you know who already play the game and be able to get into matches with them. Maybe you're even watching this and saying, but DW, all the things you said sound great. Well, more power to you. If you like Humankind already, more power to you. If it's something that is actually up your alley, then maybe give it a try. Nobody's stopping you from doing that. I would still say wait for a deep discount on it before you try to delve into this thing, because even though it's been several years since this game came out, its MSRP is still somehow $50 US. It's definitely not something you should be picking up for $50 US. Pick it up when it goes on sale for a deep discount if it still seems interesting to you, and maybe you'll be able to get something out of it. Just know that I wasn't really able to get anything out of it, and 4X strategy games are something that I've been playing for a long time and generally enjoying, so simply enjoying 4X strategy games doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like Humankind. It is very much its own thing, and that civilization switching mechanic and lack of personality really do weigh heavily upon it. That's not as much the case with Amplitude's other games because they have their own specific universe for those, the Endless universe, and that actually has quite a bit of personality to it, which makes it all the more frustrating that it's not really on display here in Humankind. But who knows, maybe if they ever make a sequel to Humankind, they'll address that kind of thing. We just don't know yet, and we probably won't know for quite a while because they're currently working on Endless Legend 2, and that's a fair bit away from being fully finished. It's in early access right now. I'll probably take a look at it eventually, but it'll have to be after I've made videos on, of course, the original Endless Legend, but also Endless Space 1 and 2, because it all ties in together. So I guess keep an eye out for all of that if you're interested in any of those, but I have no idea when those videos would happen. As for Humankind itself, again, this is very much a subjective, your mileage is going to vary kind of game. If everything I've said to you sounds interesting, then maybe give it a shot if you can get it on sale for a good discount. But I definitely would not recommend picking this up at full price, even if you are a die-hard 4X strategy game fan. Because at the end of the day, there's just a whole bunch of other much more interesting 4X strategy games out there. At any rate, thank you all very much for watching, and bearing with me on not only how rambly this video got at times, but also how sparse the videos have been lately. It's just been a particularly busy time of year, so I haven't really had all that much time or energy to be able to record the audio for the videos. That's the main thing holding them back right now, is recording the audio commentary. So I'm having to just steal away moments where I can actually get something recorded, and it's just been a whole mess. So again, I appreciate you bearing with me on all this. As for what to expect next from the channel, I am working on clearing up some of the backlog, and I also have a video I'm working on a new release, so stay tuned for all that. Thank you all very much again for watching, and I will see you all in later videos.